On behalf of the Group of Earth Observations and the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, I wish everybody a heartily welcome to this webinar that we have called Wetlands, Biodiversity, and the Role of Earth Observations. So the program for today is a series of presentations from our experts, giving you an introduction to wetlands, biodiversity, and Earth observations. Who am I? I would call myself actually an expert on Earth observations, but I'm really a novice when it comes to wetlands and biodiversity. So I am really excited to hear from our expert that we are so fortunate to have with us today. So I will start to introduce the people to you. And the first coming up is Roy Gardner. Roy, can you say hello to people? Tell a little bit who you are.
Good day. Good day. I'm Roy Gardner. I'm an environmental law professor at Stetson University in Florida in the United States. And I also serve as chair of the Ramsar Convention's Scientific and Technical Review Panel. And it is a pleasure to be with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Roy. The next one is Parineeta Dandekar. Hello from India.
Hello, Bente, and hi, hello, viewers. It's really an honor, and it's so great to be here. I'm Parineeta. I'm from India. I work with an organization called South Asia Network on Dams, Rivers, and People. For the past 20 years, we've been looking at rivers, ecosystems, and people, and wetlands, and a number of issues that surround them, including infrastructure, that's dams, and the impacts that they have on people and ecosystems. And I hope to learn from this webinar just like you. Thank you.
Thank you, Parineeta. And next, we are going back to Europe, and that's Jörg Freyhof. Hello, Jörg.
Hello, Bente. Hello, everybody. So my name is Jörg Freyhof, and I'm a freshwater biologist from my background. And I work as the executive director of GEOBON, or here in Leipzig at the Integrative Center of Biodiversity Research of Germany.
Thank you, Jörg. And the final speaker is Marc Paganini.
We sit here together in one room.
Yes. Yes.
Hello to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. So my name is Marc Paganini. I'm from the European Space Agency in the Earth observation programs and in the Science and Application Department. And actually, I'm a good connection between Ramsar and GEOBON, since I'm actually member of the advisory committee of GEOBON and a member of the scientific and technical review panel of Ramsar. So actually, I'm following the biodiversity and Ramsar activities in ESA.
Thank you, Marc. And we also have somebody from Canada here, Rick Lawford. Can you say hello to people?
Yes, hi. Welcome everybody to this session. It's going to be a very entertaining and informative session, I'm sure. My name is Rick Lawford. I am the point of contact for the water activities within the GEO program, as well as the chair of the Water Cycle Community of Practice. I work at part-time at Morgan State University in Baltimore in the U.S. As a water consultant to NASA, and I also have a contract working as a consultant on geo matters with the Japanese Space Agency. So this will be a very informative workshop in terms of helping to define the needs for water information in terms of being able to monitor wetlands, and it's great to have our biodiversity experts with us today to kind of elaborate what those needs are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. So we are almost there and ready to start, but before that, there's some housekeeping I would like to do with you, and that is to tell you that we do have the possibility to engage in questions and comments You should be able to find that via the link you got when you registered. We will try to answer some questions in between the presentations, but we will also try to stay within the hour. So we will see how it goes. If people are ready to stay on a little bit after the end of the webinar, we might be able to answer more questions. We will see. Anyways, you are welcome to answer questions. And even if we don't have time to answer everything, we will record it and use that for future webinars. And towards the end, we would also like to send you some surprise gifts. It will, of course, be very useful and related to the topics, but you will be rewarded for staying on to the end. So I think we are ready to start. And we will start with a short video demonstrating or visualizing what we are going to talk about. One example of a wetland, and I will then share a video with you and do some technical things here. The video is 1 minute and 30 seconds, so stay put. And here we go.
The county governor of Nordland is responsible for the management of the Bliksvær Ramsar site. Concerning monitoring, our main challenge is to keep track of the changes in vegetation on the island.
And we are back here in this webinar room, and as you could see, that's just one example, and you heard of a wetlands, an Arctic wetlands, and you heard a manager tell us a little bit, just very simple challenge that he has. Now, Roy will tell you a lot more about wetlands, and you will see that this was just one example and that there are many, many more. Roy, I give the floor to you.
Thank you.
I guess you are trying to share your video. Okay, here we go.
Yep, here we go. Well, thank you and good day. It is a pleasure to be here to provide an overview about wetlands and their benefits. First, what do you think a wetland is? When you think of a wetland, what image comes to mind? Perhaps a salt marsh, or a mangrove forest, or it might be a huge expanse such as the Everglades in the United States that includes many types of wetlands, including freshwater marshes and cypress domes. Or perhaps you think of a small area such as a prairie pothole formed by glaciers, or peatlands such as this one in Estonia. But what about sandy beaches, or coral reefs. Are these wetlands as well? And the correct answer is all of the above, and others as well. There are a number of different definitions of wetlands for different purposes, but let's consider the broadest, which has been adopted by the Ramsar Convention. The Ramsar Convention is an intergovernmental treaty that has approximately 170 countries as members or contracting parties, and the Ramsar Convention's mission is the conservation and wise use of wetlands. Under the convention, wetlands are defined as areas of marsh, fen, peatland, or water, whether natural or artificial. They can be permanent or temporary, and the water may be static or flowing, fresh, brackish, or salt, and it also includes certain marine areas. With this number of with such a broad definition, it is helpful to categorize types of wetlands. And generally, there are 5 major types recognized: marine wetlands, so these would be the coastal areas; estuarine, which can include deltas and tidal marshes and mangrove swamps; lacustrine, which are wetlands that are associated with lakes; riverine, wetlands along rivers and streams; and palustrine, which would include marshes, swamps, and bogs. There can also be human-made wetlands. Another way to divide or classify wetlands is coastal versus inland. So here we have different types of coastal wetlands across the landscape. And here we can see different types of inland wetlands on the landscape. The driving force behind any wetland is water. Wetlands are areas where the water is the primary factor that controls the environment and therefore the associated plant and animal life. And wetlands occur where the water table is at or near the surface of the land, or where the land is covered by water. Wetlands are found throughout the world, on every continent, and in every country, from the shores to the mountains. But although wetlands are located across the globe, they vary enormously. Some may be huge areas, such as the Pantanal, which extends across parts of Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay. Or they can be quite small, such as ponds or oases, that may be no more than a few square meters. And some wetlands are permanently covered with water, which could be lakes, or others are temporary or seasonally covered, which may be springs or floodplains. And they get their source of water in a variety of different ways as well. Some wetlands are fed by rain, such as raised peat bogs, while others may depend on groundwater, such as fens and springs, while still others rely on an exchange with tidal waters, such as coastal mudflats and salt marshes. So there is quite a diversity of wetlands. And these different types of wetlands provide different types of benefits or ecosystem services to people. And here are some examples of these ecosystem services or benefits that different types of wetlands provide. There's a whole range. Some may offer protection from natural hazards such as storm surges. Others may act as a sponge and can provide flood protection. Some provide sources of drinking water. Others act as filters and can help purify water by filtering harmful pollutants. Some wetlands sequester carbon and therefore perform that function and benefit people in that way. Wetlands are also a source of food, including fish and shellfish, as many of these species depend on wetlands during some part of their life cycle. And wetlands are also important for recreation and tourism, as well as for cultural, spiritual, and religious reasons. When an economic value is placed on wetlands, studies have found that wetlands have among the highest monetary value of all ecosystems. So, in sum, wetlands are vital for the maintenance of human well-being. They provide a range of benefits to people, and they are among the world's most productive environments and are cradles of biological diversity. They support high concentrations of birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and invertebrate species. But across the world, wetlands are threatened. Long viewed as wastelands, we don't always appreciate the ecosystem services and benefits that they provide. And the primary causes and drivers of wetland loss and degradation include development, land conversion, water withdrawals, pollution, over-harvesting and over-exploitation, and also the spread of invasive alien species. On top of all of this, global climate change is expected to exacerbate wetland loss and degradation. So it is critical that we use all the tools available to help inform policymakers, wetland managers, and the public about the state of wetlands and the importance of conserving them and using them wisely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roy. That was a clear demonstration that it is a rather complex systems that we are looking at. And there are many challenges related, and we cannot cover everything, but we have an interesting challenge from India that Parineeta will tell us about. Parineeta, are you ready?
Yes. Yes, I'm ready. Could you just give me a minute or two to set this up?
Yes,
I'm
sure.
sharing the screen, Bente. Can I try it out?
Yes. You go ahead and try to share your screen. Sometimes there is some lags, and for while we are waiting, just to say that this is actually a live broadcast, and there will be technical glitches, and we apologize for everything. I should have said that in the beginning, but I'm sure you understand. So, how are we doing, Parineeta?
I don't think it's working. So, can we start the presentation from your end, and then
Yes.
I'll.
Yep. We can do that. I can do a screen share. Hold on.
Thank you so much. Thank you also to the audience for being patient with this.
I'll do this one. I think then I have to use my screen, and then we will hear Parineeta's voice. Okay, here we go. You see it, Parineeta?
I do. Bente, just a small hitch. These are not the new files that I sent, but let us. We would just go on with this. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. So, well, we're right. One of the main challenges faced by wetlands today. Well, there are a number of other challenges also, like pollution, loss of biodiversity. One of the main challenges faced by South Asia, as well as other countries like in Africa and South America, and also South and Southeast Asia, has been infrastructure development. Infrastructure development in terms of dams, embankments, levees, and increasingly hydropower. So we looked at the importance of wetlands and the services that wetlands do provide, many a times which are more in economic terms than the value of converted wetlands. Let us see how they're coping up with the challenges that they're facing. South Asia has over 60 Ramsar wetland sites, and in this region, as also in most of the developing world, wetlands like rivers and lakes are not only vistas of biodiversity, but are also livelihood resources for millions of people. For example, 200,000 farmers in the southern Indian state of Kerala depend on a Ramsar site for agriculture. Similarly, 600,000 depend on a Ramsar site in the central India for drinking water. And nearly 11 million people in India depend on the rivers and the riverine fisheries for their livelihoods and also nutritional security. But unfortunately, India's definition of wetlands does not include rivers. Can we go ahead? Next, please, Vente. Yes. So, no. India is also a mega diverse country when it comes to fish, and the problems that we are sharing here are actually shared between a number of countries: Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal to a certain extent, and also increasingly South America and Southeast Asia. What you see right on your right is a mighty river called Sutlej, which is a tributary of the mighty Indus. This is downstream of a hydropower dam, and this is how the river has turned out. These interventions have affected the hydrology, ecology, nutrient balance, and also the livelihoods that have been depending on the rivers and their associated floodplains, oxbows, and the communities also. Can we go ahead? Not only has the dam building affected major river systems, but also Ramsar sites. We have a report on how Indian Ramsar sites and also sites in Pakistan and Bangladesh have been affected severely due to dam building and the associated changes like drying up of the wetlands as well as maintaining fixed level of water in the wetlands. That also has a tremendous impact on wetlands because wetlands per se are a very dynamic system which has high level of water fluctuations as per the season, except alpine wetlands. For example, the Indus Delta wetland site in Pakistan has been reduced to 1/6 of its pre-dam size due to retention of water as well as sediments from the upstream obstructions. Next. We see a few pictures. Can we come ahead? Yes. We see a few pictures. On your left top corner is actually the Indus Delta, and you can see how dry it has become. Delta, which is one of the most productive part of the ecosystem of a river, and this is not only India is facing similar challenges. Then we see dead fish on a riverbed following just downstream of a hydropower project. On the right corner, we see muck dumping downstream of a hydropower project and how that is actually coming into the river. Then we see fisher folk from a lake called Loktak who are fighting for their existence. They've been living with the lake for centuries, but now due to a number of challenges, which includes a hydropower project, their existence at their lake is being threatened. Loktak is also a Ramsar site. You can go ahead. This is a tributary of the mighty Ganges, nearly dewatered. It was once a spectacular habitat of fish, but now the entire existence of the aquatic ecosystem is at the mercy of the dams in the upstream. Next. Most of the large hydropower development in India and also in the neighboring state of Nepal is concentrated in the Himalayas, which, as you know, is one of the most vulnerable spots right now. The Ganges basin up in the Himalayas will possibly be the most dammed basin in the entire world if all the proposed dams, which are more than 300, actually come across. Next. These are some of the dams proposed in in just one part of the Ganges river system, and these are just a few dams. Some of these are also, one of this is also supported by the World Bank, despite the fact that it does not have a cumulative impact assessment study to understand the impacts on the ecosystem. Next. This is the Satluj Basin, the one that we saw, part of the Indus Basin. You can see here the black lines are the dams and the dotted lines are the tunnels. So if you actually look at the course of Satluj, you see that the entire river is possibly going to be tunneled due to dams which come one after the other, bumper to bumper dams. Here too, World Bank has been funding and pushing a number of hydropower projects, despite community protests and concerns raised by ecologists. Next. This is Arunachal Pradesh, part of northeast India, an extremely biodiverse, lesser studied region with more than 200 fish species and many more which are still not known to science. This tiny state will possibly host 160 large hydropower projects. Next. This is one of the rivers from the northeast. The name is Lohit, which forms part of the mighty Brahmaputra. This is threatened by a hydropower dam in the upstream, which will possibly completely change the hydrology of this river system. This hydro-peaking is a huge challenge that is being faced by rivers and river systems and ecosystems in South Asia. The water level fluctuations for one of the river systems would be 23 feet in the plains every single day. The river will rise and fall by 23 feet, and this is highly biodiverse area. Next. This is how much the river will fall and rise in a single day. Downstream is also a proposed Ramsar site and an important bird area hosting critically endangered species like the Bengal florican. Next. In India and South Asia, wetlands are associated not only with biodiversity but with livelihoods and also with culture. So for example, the floodplains of this river called Nyamjang Chu in the northeast corner of the country are revered by the local Buddhist communities because these are the nesting grounds for the vulnerable black-necked cranes, the wintering grounds of these cranes, which are now seriously threatened by, again, a hydropower dam which is coming up in the upstream, or it coming right at the site of this, of the wintering site of these cranes. Next. Dams in Himalayas are also supported by the World Bank, the Norwegian government, the Swedish government, and the German KfW. And this is despite the fact that not sufficient oversight on the individual and cumulative impacts of such projects, the ecological impacts or the social impacts, have happened. Next. And this is Western Ghats, World Biodiversity Hotspot, a World Heritage Site. This is just one part of the Western Ghats and the concentration of the dams that you see here. Next. The Western Ghat wetlands, like you can see here, are not only important for biodiversity, but the wetland where the egret is standing is actually a drinking water supply scheme for a village. And the wetland associated with the temple here is actually also an irrigation tank. So these multiple uses are fascinating, and they need to be protected and conserved for the ecosystem as well as the communities. Next. Indian, South Asian, and problems of developing countries are slightly different than the problems which are faced by the developed countries. International conventions like the Convention on Biological Diversity, Ramsar Convention, UNFCCC, I'm sorry I'm being slightly blunt here, but they have been little effective on ground. Ramsar, to a certain extent, has really helped wetlands in India, but when it comes to engaging and responding to the actual challenges on the ground, for example, this onslaught of hydropower, then we see that these conventions have not really helped to that extent. We do see a light at the end of the tunnel through community struggles and rejuvenation and restoration that's been going on throughout the world. Why only India? But this is going to take some time. So we urge Ramsar, and there's also the office bearers here, so we take this opportunity to highlight the impacts of such dense hydropower development and dam development on wetlands in developing countries in South Asia like India, and we hope that these issues are flagged in the discussions also which would happen in the COP, and also to the UNFCCC we urge, please do not issue carbon credits to large hydropower. Such hydropower projects are neither clean nor green. Thank you. Next, Bente.
Thank you, Parineeta. Yeah, that's it? Yes. Great. Thank you. I will go back to my face, we say. And let me see. It might be so that we did not show the slides to everybody, but I suppose that we will be able to share the slides to the audience afterwards, to those who have registered. Can you confirm that, Parineeta? Did we lose her? Yes, okay. Let me see. Okay. So now we have heard a bit of quite serious problems and challenges connected to dams and rivers and wetlands and biodiversity. I guess that Jörg will tell us even more, and from the perspective of biodiversity. Are you ready to share with us, Jörg?
Yes, I'm ready to share with you. Let's see if this works out. So you have my slides?
No, I don't think I have. I have Marc's slides. You did not...
You have Marc's slides, okay. Then let me close Marc here. So now you should have my slides, is it?
No, now I actually see myself on, I think you picked the wrong screen to share.
Yeah, maybe. Here it is.
Mm-hmm.
You have it now?
Yes.
Okay.
You're ready to go.
So,
go for it.
You have it in full scale?
Yes.
Okay,
perfect.
So all technical problems are solved.
Yes.
So thank you very much for setting this up. Also thank you the other speakers for their really interesting and touching talks. So wetlands are of course a hub for biodiversity, and biodiversity is really a big thing. So let's start with the definition of biodiversity following the Convention of Biodiversity, the CBD from 2007. So biodiversity is the variability among living organisms from all ecosystems and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes the diversity within species, so generally genetic diversity, between species, and of ecosystems. So here we talk about freshwater ecosystems. So basically, this is just a part of wetlands. So the wetlands which are formed by freshwaters, and they are really a very, very tiny part of the Earth. So freshwater ecosystems cover only 0.8% of the Earth's surface, but they are exceptionally diverse. More than 10% of all animal species live in freshwater ecosystems, and about 35% of all vertebrate species are restricted to freshwaters at least for a certain time of their life. So freshwaters, despite the amount of freshwater ecosystems is really very small, a huge amount of biodiversity is fully restricted to freshwater ecosystems. And we are really in a freshwater ecosystem crisis If you take the Living Planet Index, which I brought you here as a graph, you see immediately that the decline of freshwater species is much more serious than it is in any other major realm. So no other major group of species in ecosystem declines as fast and has declined as massively as freshwater ecosystems. And it's not just, oh, it's a bit going down. We are facing extinctions all the time. And I bring you here two very famous examples: the Chinese freshwater dolphin, the baiji, which went extinct a few years ago, and the golden toad from Costa Rica, which was restricted to a very tiny area in a rainforest, which also went extinct within very few years. Even in the European Union, we have a wide-ranging assessment for the conservation status of various animals and plants, and no other taxonomy group is as threatened as freshwater species. So on the very top, freshwater mollusks and freshwater fishes. So why is this the case? This is very clear. Freshwater is a very important resource, and many humans depend on the use of freshwaters. And if you look into the very famous water, food, and energy nexus, you see there is no biodiversity mentioned at all. So basically, the global community decides actually what do we do with each drop of fresh water? Do we use it for energy, as Parineeta presented very interestingly, or we do use it for food production, and there is seems to be no space for biodiversity at all left. But millions, maybe billions of people depend on freshwater biodiversity for their livelihoods. And this is especially true in developing countries where people have very few other options, if they have other options at all, than to depend on ecosystem services and biodiversity. So it's really leaving the developing countries behind, and in the developing countries, leaving the poor people behind by just sharing fresh waters between, let's say, usually it's industrial food production and hydropower. Hydropower was mentioned. It's a massive threat, and I can only support what Parineeta shows. I can show you similar maps for Europe where this is coming to us like a tsunami. It's really unbelievable. Virtually all countries have explored their hydropower potentials and really try to exploit all hydropowers which are possible to be exploited. And there is no space for any concern by local populations, people, biodiversity, livelihoods, and so on and so on. Water obstruction, I mean, Roy already mentioned there is many threats. I bring you only two. So water obstruction is, of course, a major issue, especially in Southern Europe, the Middle East, and many other areas which are arid or semi-arid, what is just pumped out and nothing is left behind. So what can Earth observation do for all of this? I mean, this webinar is a bit about Earth observation. First, of course, we can observe how our Earth is changing and how wetlands are changing and how the use of freshwater, how freshwater biodiversity is changing, how much biodiversity has already been lost, and we can find out where are the hotspots of threats, the hotspots for biodiversity to act and invest to mitigate, because actually really there is money to help countries or to solve or at least mitigate their environmental problems. But we need to know where help is needed most. And there is big conventions. Most countries signed into these conventions, like the Convention of Biological Diversity, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, Ramsar, the Convention on Migratory Species, and so on and so on and so on. And of course, from us as international bodies, these conventions ask for sound scientific data on biodiversity and ecosystem status and change. And this is something Earth observation can really contribute to. So GEO and GEOBON as the biodiversity arm of GEO, we are active in collecting biodiversity data, especially biodiversity trend data, and we are active to build up the global biodiversity observation system to allow local NGOs to understand what is their situation in a global frame and from a global perspective. To do so, we developed something what is called the essential biodiversity variables, so variables which structure the observation of biodiversity. These have been published in Science, and the paper is available through the webpage of the organization GEOBON, which you easily find in the web under geobon.org. So what are we now fishing for? We are fishing, of course, for data, especially for trend data. So where is biodiversity really changing, and where is biodiversity threatened by different pressures? And the data, the big data challenge is really a big data challenge. You see here, this is Trichoptera or caddis flies of the Western Palearctic, and you see huge empty areas where we have no information about. And this is the case for many biodiversity elements. And it's really very tricky to have these in situ data to inform the big conventions like the CBD, which then can give a pressure to national governments if we lack the data in such an extent. And this is my last slide. So the big challenge is really to combine in situ time series with remote sensing data to build up a global observation system delivering data and information for user. So we are, since a while, we're trying to promote GEOBOS, the global wetland observing system, and there is already some success in this direction, and we hope that this system will be really useful in the future to inform all of you outside about the status of your local area, of your wetlands in your local areas, as well as on the global scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jörg. You are definitely leading up to the next presentation that there are, even though the problems are really complex, there are some tools that we can use to make them less difficult for us. But there is no doubt we need to have respect for the complexity of the issues that we have been presented for by you all. And but before I give the floor to Marc, I thought we should have a couple of questions that seems to be directed towards Parineeta, and also some that Roy maybe can answer. So we take a little bit of break before, well, break in the series of the speakers. So we can start with. I get a back. I think maybe you can mute yourself, Roy. Thank you. So Parineeta, you have a question from Steph. Are you talking about e-flows or more rigorous, environmental friendly hybrid engineering solutions? It seems to be a very complicated question, but could you say a few words about that?
No, I think it's a very relevant question. Thank you, Steph. Definitely e-flows, and India, though possibly scientifically we may not be catching up with the developed world in the trajectory of the e-flows, but governance-wise, e-flows has become one of the biggest discussion challenges in the country. There have been a lot of efforts, and increasingly so, but I think the challenge lies not only not with issues like e-flows or engineering solutions, but democratic governance surrounding hydropower, dams, and basically natural resource management on which livelihoods of millions depend. If we could actually address the governance challenges and the policy challenges, then engineering solutions, technical solutions do fall in place, I believe. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Parineeta. And then I think I will give this one for you then, Roy, from Puya, who is asking, what is the major difference between wetlands ecosystems, river ecosystems?
It's a very good question, and it depends on whose definition you're using. Actually, under the Ramsar classification scheme, rivers are included within the definition of wetlands. And this in some ways highlights the challenge of coming up with global wetland maps, because there are different definitions that are used in different countries. But Ramsar, under the convention, has, I think, the broadest definition that encompasses all of these aquatic areas, including rivers.
Well, thank you, Roy. I think we can take more questions towards the end to make sure that we get all the presentations within the hour, as I promised. And like Jörg was leading up to, there are some things that we can do to facilitate both, well, the management of it and also learning more of this, more about these complex systems. So, Marc, I give the floor to you. I think you need to unmute yourself.
That's better?
Yes, yes it is, Marc. You can go ahead.
Sorry about this, there are always a bit of technical problems. I think you have my presentation on the screen now?
Yes, we see you very
yes,
clearly.
Give me the challenge actually to convince the audience why Earth observation is really an essential tool for the Ramsar conventions and in order to face these problems of the fresh water crisis, as Jörg has said. I would like to start just by giving you 4 reasons why Earth observation is really important for biodiversity. The very first one is that it provides a continuous observations of the Earth, and especially in remote places where you can hardly go on the field. Second, I mean, we have now, I think, all the space agencies more than 40 years of archive, and we are committed actually to maintain this archive. And this is very often the only way to get trend information, and we know how important it is to look back in the past and to see what has been happening on our wetlands. The third criteria is how important it is to look at wetlands at different scales, and Earth observations allows you actually to look at the scale of a wetlands, but also at the scale of a basin. And we all know how it is important actually to put the wetlands in the context of the full catchment. And the last point is that it's important also to use different type of sensors or satellites in order to capture different environmental parameters that all together allows you actually to better understand the wetlands. So these are really the 4, let's say, criteria that I would put upon to why Earth observation is very important. So what can we do for the Ramsar Convention? What can we do for the Ramsar parties? In order to better protect and restore their wetlands? Well, we can act on 3 topics. The very first one is the wetland inventories, because despite the 40 years of existence of Ramsars, we still don't have a global inventory of wetlands. A number of countries have not yet done their wetland inventories, and here Earth observation is definitely an important tool. We can also use Earth observation to make an assessment of the wetlands. I mean, on the status of the wetlands, but more also at the same level on the threats of the wetlands. And we know how important it is actually to look at what can put in danger the status of our wetlands. And the last point is, of course, the monitoring. So it's good to have assessments, but it's good to repeat these assessments on a regular basis. So these tools can be important for the scientists to improve the knowledge of the wetlands, especially the way the wetlands functions, but also on the wetland managers to have a more efficient management and on the conservation and restorations of wetlands, and of course the contracting parties, that means the governments, in order to improve their monitoring and reporting obligations that they have with respect to Ramsars. So I would like to give you just a few examples of what we can do with Earth observation to show you that actually we can already do a lot. The first one is to look at the status of the wetlands and the changes, and this is done by mapping the wetland habitats, and that's very important if you want to see how much of the wetland habitat have been lost over the recent years. So this tool is used mainly to detect changes and derive trends, but also to assess the threats, like especially the pressure that we have from agriculture and urban, but also from the dams. I mean, and of course we can use these wetland habitats mapping in order to see the impact of a dam on the wetlands. The second one is to look at, and Roy mentioned important to look at water, is to capture the what we call the inundation regimes, which is what is permanently flooded in wetlands, or what is seasonally flooded, or just occasionally flooded. And this is very important to capture this. And it's quite challenging because, I mean, wetlands are very dynamic, so you need really time series, you need really the repeated observations in order to capture these changes in the inundation regimes. And the last example I want to give you is important to look at the water quality. So Earth observations at different we have developed different technology in order to get some informations on the water quality, especially the suspended sediments, which is a sign of the physical disturbance, the chlorophyll concentrations, which is used very often to look at, to assess the level of nutrients, especially the excessive level of nutrients and the risk of eutrophications, and the dissolved organic matters, which are also a sign of contaminations. But we can also look at blooms, and as you can see in this example on the Lake Victoria, where I wanted to show you the proliferation that we had in the Lake Victoria on the water hyacinths in 2007. So it's good to have maps, but it's even better to have indicators, because that's what the policy makers want. That's based on what they will make a decision at the end. So you need to define a certain number of indicators, and that's what we've been doing with the Ramsars in order to see what has been the change in the wetland habitats, and especially in relation to agriculture and urbanization pressures. So I want to give you just an example of a recent projects we've been completed together with Ramsar and the Mediterranean Wetland Observatory, where we try to see what has been the trend in the wetland habitats over the last 30 years. So we analyzed almost 300 wetland sites in more than 20 countries around the Mediterranean basins, and we tried to derive some indications of how much the wetlands have changed. And one of the conclusions of this analysis is that over the last 30 years, we lost about 10% of the wetland habitats. And I just want to give you a few examples of what we could derive from the Earth observations, which is in this case the loss of the wet meadows. And overall, in all the sites we've been studied, we lost almost 50% of this. And that's what you see in the brownish color in this view graph. And what you see in yellow are the agricultural fields, so the pressure that actually of the agriculture on the wetlands. Another good example is what happened on the Nile Delta, and especially on the lagoons, where almost 400 square kilometers of lagoons have disappeared. And this is mainly related to the development of aquaculture and the fish ponds. That's what you see in the dark blue. Again, yellow means agriculture, and the blue are indicating the wetlands habitats. So, where do we stand with those observations? Well, recently there's been a study made by the World Conservation Monitoring Center trying to see first how Earth observation is used for biodiversity monitoring and what has been the challenges for its use, for its broad use by the wetland community. And they raise issues like the satellite, the restrictive data policies, the difficulties to get access to satellite data, the fact that the products are not always easy to use for non-Earth observation experts, the fact that there's a lack of capacity and training, the fact that we don't have the temporal resolution to capture the changes in wetlands, and the most important one, the lack of long-term continuity of observations, because if you want to invest in those observations, you need continuity of observations. And I must say that actually our governments are really responding to this. I mean, this is becoming, space is becoming very high on the agenda of our government. So in the US, we finally have a sustainable land imaging in a program that was not existing in the past. At European level, we have this Copernicus initiative, which is a very strong commitment from our countries, securing this access to satellite data on the very long term. And I'm not talking about 5 or 10 years here. We talk about continuity of observations for the next 20 to 30 years. So it's really a lot, and all with a free and open data policy. The satellites of the Copernicus initiative are the Sentinel satellites, and I want just to highlight one of these satellites with the Sentinel-2, which is, I must say, the satellite that probably the wetland communities have been dreaming to have for a very long term, because it has first all the, well, I'm a bit technical on this, but it has the spectral bands necessary in order to well discriminate the wetland habitats, and it's very important. It has a very high revisiting frequency. We're talking about 5 days revisiting that will allow us to really capture the variation of the wetlands, especially water, but not only water. And it has also a 10-meter spatial resolutions, which is very important for small wetlands. And last but not least, it has a systematic acquisitions of all land surface and coastal waters. So everywhere in the world will be observed in the same way. And this will be given to everybody with an open and free data policy. And we have a launch, actually, and I really invite everybody to follow this launch. It's on the Tuesday next week at about 2 o'clock GMT. So for Europe, it will be around 10 to 4 in the morning, and it's really an important launch, I think, for the community. I will just end up with 2 slides. We are now engaging in developing an open source and free of charge toolbox for the contracting parties of Ramsar to develop wetland observatories around satellite observations. And this is the project is called Globe Wetland Africa, because we will start with Africa, because that's where actually it's really needed, but the tool will be made available to everybody. And there is another initiative that was recently launched, also related to GEOBON. By the way, Globe Wetland Africa is actually a GEOBON also activity. So the second one is called the SWAS, which stands for Satellite-Based Wetland Observatory. And the idea is to really develop a portal where you would find all sorts of information on how to use satellite informations for wetland monitoring. So you will have access to software and toolbox, to training and capacity building facilities. And for those that don't have the means actually to do it themselves, there will be some online mapping and the possibility to derive indicators around, from these maps. So yeah, let's conclude my presentations. I hope that I convince you that Earth observation is a very important tool.
Thank you so much, Marc. It certainly is a set of powerful tools that are already there and about to be even better. Let me see here. Before we go to questions, I would just like to share an observation with you. I don't know if you noticed that our experts today come from very different backgrounds and work on these issues with very different perspectives. We started out with a law professor. Parineeta works for an NGO. We have specialist scientists and technologists. So there are many ways of addressing and many perspectives that is necessary. And this is actually the main motivation for this very webinar, that we need to be able to communicate with each other across these different perspectives. For you to get even better or get more motivation for engaging in this, we decided to let Roy from Ramsar and Rick, whom you met briefly in the beginning, talk a little bit about what they are working on from more policy perspective. So, Roy, are you ready to tell us the latest from Ramsar, perhaps?
Sure. Thanks so much, Bente, and I really appreciate everybody's wonderful and informative presentations. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how Earth observation is and can be a very important tool within the Ramsar community, and how it can contribute at different levels, at different scales. And so one way is at the global level, and the Ramsar parties meet once every 3 years. And so we just met several weeks ago in Uruguay for the Conference of the Parties 12, COP12. And at COP12, the parties requested from the scientific and technical review panel that there be a State of the World's Wetlands report produced. So this is to be the flagship publication of the convention, and it's something that Earth observation and the data from these projects can feed into. And the point is that these publications can help inform policy makers and decision makers to let them know about trends, and to emphasize the need to take action. But it's not only within the Ramsar convention itself. As was mentioned by Jörg, there's the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And IPBES is conducting a number of assessments, global assessment, but also regional assessments, where wetlands play an important role. And the data that comes in from Earth observation can be very, very helpful there as well. And in addition, at the global level, we have the UN is working on Sustainable Development Goals, and there will be indicators for water-related targets. And once again, the data from these projects can feed quite naturally into supporting the indicators to let the world community know how we are doing in terms of protecting or not protecting these valuable ecosystems. But that's all at the global level. This information really, as Marc noted, can also be very helpful at the site level to demonstrate the status and trends that are going on at particular sites, and help site managers and other decision makers think about their actions and how they can protect these sites so that they can not only ensure the biodiversity that they provide, but the ecosystem services that are delivered to people as well. So it's really, I think, from the Ramsar perspective, it is a very exciting development, and we're looking forward to collaboration with the ESA and with others. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Roy. But before you leave us, can you tell us? Can you demonstrate what the name of the university you work at looks like?
I'm at Stetson University College of Law, and so most people, when they hear Stetson, they may think of the cowboy hat Stetson, and we are indeed named after the Philadelphia hat maker John B. Stetson, that created these fine hats. So thank you for the opportunity to demonstrate that.
Thank you. I love them, Stetson. And just to breaking up a little bit about, breaking up the seriousness of policy on the global level, because the next portion of this webinar will also be on policy a little bit. And Rick, I have to call you the father of this webinar, actually, because you were the one that brought us all together and started the whole thing as part of the water strategy that I believe you will inform us a little bit about now.
Well, thanks for the kind comments, Bent, but I think a lot of people were involved and contributed to that, including Michelle Walter and a few others. We have produced a 10-year strategy, which maybe you can see here, for the Group on Earth Observations to deal with water. We call it From Observations to Decisions because we're trying to track how information is generated that's relevant to decision making and how decision makers use it. This report looks at the ways to bring forward the different satellite observations that you've been hearing about by European Space Agency and NASA and other space agencies, and how we can incorporate this into an overall program that will, over the next 10 years, provide benefit for major sectors of the population. And within this program, we are targeting 6 particular areas that we want to focus on. One is security of domestic and usable water supplies in all areas of the world. Another one, climate change adaptation in the water resource area. And amongst the 5 are access to water for ecosystems and biological systems. And I think maybe this area is one that we want to pursue through some of these initiatives that you've heard about today and through interactions with the Ramsar Convention program. And also, we'd like to take advantage of the broader definition which came up today of the interactions between ecosystems and water. I think Roy mentioned how ecosystems, wetlands in particular, actually can be suppliers of fresh water. They can purify the water. And we want to build that into the program. We also want to build into the program a broader perspective on Earth observations. We've heard about satellites. We value in situ data as well, and how we can bring in situ data together with satellite data to develop integrated data products. And the Ramsar network, I think, could be very helpful in that. Also, as we move forward, as all of you are likely aware, there's a so-called data revolution that's being proposed in conjunction with the Sustainable Development Goals, whereby citizen data is used much more extensively. And the plan is, over the next 10 years, to find ways of incorporating those observations that people make with their cameras or reporting on tweets and so forth, incorporate that into the overall database as a new data set. And we are looking to develop the framework for integrating that data with satellite data. And of course, that also will involve connecting with models and the use of models so that we can use the best information plus the knowledge that has already been developed through knowledge and built into models to provide a product which is most relevant to the decision maker. So we would like to engage with Ramsar and with the biodiversity component of GEO and with other groups as well to see if we can move forward in this way. We're starting to move forward under Future Earth in the water, energy, food nexus area, and we may also be able to ensure that the issues related to ecosystems are part of that discussion, because one of the constraints on the water, energy, food nexus will clearly be how we use the landscape, and we need to think about that more clearly. Also, as mentioned, the Sustainable Development Goals will look at the linkages between water and biodiversity, in particular looking at wetlands as a possible source of supply of clean water, possibly, and as well the water that's going to be available for wetland maintenance over time. So I think that's basically all I had to say. One other exciting innovation which is coming along, probably to be launched in 2020 if everything goes well, is a Surface Water and Ocean Topography Mission, SWOT, which is a satellite geared to measure water levels. Again, possibly not at the resolution that's really required, but it will pick up the larger wetlands and provide information on the degree of drying that's taking place. Again, it was a very informative webinar. I really appreciated all of the presentations, in fact, and all highly relevant to the issues of biodiversity and wetlands. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. And the report that you showed on the screen is actually the gift I was talking about when we started. You will all get a PDF version of that report, and we did have plans to make a short, a shorter PDF that is more easy consumable, and but we didn't have time for it right now. But we can send it to those of you who registered. Will get a short PDF with links to more information that you heard about today, and maybe even more reports, so that you can follow up later and go deeper into it later. Yes, I think we are 10 minutes past the hour now, but I think that we will try to answer some questions because there has been quite an activity on the chat board, and for those of you who haven't participated yet, we will keep that room, the chat room, open so that you can post more questions, and then we will use those questions for the further planning, as I said. So and maybe we will be able to answer some of the questions directly in the chat room after we finish the webinar. But we will take a couple of questions right now. I have a question from Mofisur to Roy. Mofisur, he asks if Ramsar Secretariat are able to take action if a government is harming a Ramsar site. Do you have that kind of power?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And so under the Ramsar Convention, every party has to designate at least one site as a wetland of international importance, and so those would be Ramsar sites. And once they do that, they then have an international obligation to maintain the ecological character of that site. They also have an obligation that if there is a change in ecological character, that needs to be told to the Secretariat. The Secretariat needs to be informed of that. The Secretariat is the administrative body that sits in Switzerland that helps with the day-to-day administration of the convention. The Secretariat, however, does not have regulatory authority, and there's no formal enforcement mechanism. And so there is a duty on the countries to inform the Secretariat, and then the Secretariat can work cooperatively with the parties. So one tool may be a Ramsar advisory mission, where a group of experts will then go into the country to assess the situation and advise the country, the contracting party. But that has to be done at the country's initiative. There are some situations where a country does not notify the Secretariat about a change in ecological character, but rather the Secretariat learns about it by other means, from NGOs or from newspaper reports or reports on the internet. And in those cases, typically what the Secretariat will do is open a file on it and notify the administrative authority in that country to inquire whether an Article 3.2 notification should be made. And a dialogue is started that way. But the Ramsar Convention is very much a framework for cooperation. It is not a regulatory treaty.
Thank you, Roy. I think now, because of the time constraint, go to the conclusion. And we will, of course, like to ask you for the continuation here, since the motivation is to inspire people to do something and contribute to solve these challenges. But before I conclude, maybe Parinita, you would like to share some ideas with us on how people can contribute and continue to contribute?
Thank you so much, Bente, and thanks, audience. It's been very active, and it's great to know so much. It's been very educative. Even from India and South Asia, the situation is not so. It's not only bleak. It is bleak, but it's not only bleak. There are some amazing initiatives, community-led struggles of protection, restoration, rejuvenation of wetlands and rivers, which are ongoing throughout the country, not only in India, but also in Pakistan and Bangladesh. From these communities, we do draw inspiration. At the same time, it's important for the communities and groups and scholars and scientists also to sort of realize that the actual battles are not only on the ground, but as Roy said, and as Rick and Jörg also pointed, it is also the governance and policy in which communities, also researchers, scientists, can actually make their voice and their opinions and the community decisions felt. I think this is a platform which needs to be used more widely, and I'm sure that this will happen down the years. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Parinita. I suppose we are ready to conclude now. Maybe Jörg, I will give the floor to you as well. You didn't get much questions directly here. Maybe it will show up in the chat room later. Floor is yours, Jörg.
So thank you, Bente. That's fine if there is not much questions. I just want to support Parinita's words. We should not forget, of course, wetlands are not doing very well at the moment, but there is huge initiatives fighting for wetlands, for wetland biodiversity, and we should also not forget that Ramsar initially has been brought into life for wetland biodiversity, and within their possibilities they do a really very good job.
Well, thank you, Jörg. To conclude, like I said, the motivation for this very webinar is to facilitate the dialogue between the different kinds of experts and activities that needs to be done. And in order to continue this, we have discussed to do the same webinar actually in August, September, after the summer. And based on the response, by the way, from the audience, I mean, it has been enormous. There's a great interest in this, so that's very motivational for us doing this work. And we are also planning other topics related to wetlands and biodiversity and the use of Earth observations. And we will look at the questions in the chat box, but we will also use the material that you were so kind to send us in the survey. For those who registered, we created a survey for you to answer, and there has been so much valuable information in those surveys. So please, as an action that you can do, a small thing, but still something, is to fill in the survey if you haven't done so, and let us know in the chat room what kind of topics you would like to learn more about, because we will definitely listen to you and get inspired to continue this information sharing. So with that, I think we are ready to conclude. I did send a link to y'all, but it doesn't it seems like there are some problems, so I will simply send it to you by email, which we have from the registry. And I think that is it. Any of the speakers having something to add at the very end?
Maybe Bente. Okay. Now.
Yeah. Mark.
I just showed the questions from Armand. I think he's probably from Canada, where he was actually raising the point that we need to not only to rely on optical sensors, but also on radar systems. He's fully right, and we are working on this actually to combine the two types of sensors actually to have a more accurate mapping. So I hope that I'm responding to Armand.
Yes, thank you. Excellent spotting. And by the way, some people were also posting links to other events related to wetlands, and it will be shared. There's something going on in Spain, I think, later on. So we will give you all this information, okay, in a PDF. And thank you, all of you in the audience, for being so active and attending this meeting. And we certainly hope to see you again. Have a nice summer.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.